Corey and the creative team at UBA start working on the rollout for Alex's return. They ever go into a screening room and watch a commercial, but then the conversation goes to an interview she's doing with one of their reporters named Laura Peterson. There's currently scheduling issues. Laura wants 2 days. And Alex says to the group, Laura Peterson's a professional. She doesn't need 2 days to follow me around. But me explain she needs 2 days because she wants to chronicle Alex leaving her quiet life and heading back to the morning show. Alex seems pretty stern, though. She can get all that in one afternoon. Alex then says goodbye to the group, but right before she leaves, she remembers to tell them about Chip. And they're all a little taken aback, but Corey tells Stella, get the deal done. Now that this little bomb has been dropped, Mia walks back into the newsroom, and right before they get into the stories they're going to do that day, she lets the group know that Chip is coming back. And it's split. Some of the group is thrilled, while others, not so much. They then go along with scheduling the next day's show. And that show does include a segment with Daniel, who barely got out of Wuhan. He was on the last train. He's currently quarantining in Beijing, and he drops a word that we'll all get really used to, social distancing. And Bradley and Eric kind of make fun of him for it. You can tell they're not really taking his situation all that seriously. They then, though, wrap up with Daniel because they have to make the big announcement about Alex's return. And it's incredibly cheesy. Corey is pumped, but, Stella, no, she doesn't really hide her emotions too well. She's not excited at all. Corey then goes to congratulate Bradley on just a job well done, but she tells him that she wants to moderate the debate in Vegas. He tells her, I appreciate that, but I'll defer to Stella on this one because Stella took over for Corey as the head of news. Corey took over for Fred, but Bradley can't believe that all of a sudden he's deciding to defer to Stella. She starts giving Corey a whole lot of attitude, telling Corey that he needs somebody who people know is an independent thinker. Alex Levy is always going to be thought of as the morning show, but moving forward, when people think of political coverage, she wants them to think about her. He reminds her, though, that Laura Peterson is going to interview her for Alex's return, and she's going to interview her at the Iowa caucus. So that is politics. Corey tries to switch topics, but Bradley says, I am going to moderate that debate. And he turns to her and says, Bradley, is your microphone on? And when she says no, he says, good, because I can't have you talking to me like this in a room full of my employees. Good show, though. And then he leaves. After the show that day, Bradley's going to have lunch with Alex. She feels kind of bad. They left on bad terms, and they are going to be reuniting. Alex starts telling Bradley that she's done a lot of soul-searching in the last 9 months, and she's changed, but Bradley doesn't really buy it. Alex, though, does apologize, and Bradley does seem to appreciate it. But the women's conversation gets interrupted when Maggie Brenner walks up. They exchange some quick pleasantries, but once Maggie leaves, Alex starts ripping her. And Bradley can't figure out why because she thinks Maggie is just a nice person, and Alex thinks that's a pretty naive comment. Alex then asks Bradley if she talked to Maggie for her book, and Bradley says, yeah, I did, but I didn't say anything bad about you. She can tell that Alex thinks she was an idiot for talking to Maggie for her book, so she reminds Alex, I've been in this business for over 20 years. I'm not going to let some journalist wrangle me into a comment that I didn't mean to say. And Alex tells her, I understand you've been in this industry for a while, but you might not be used to the Maggie Brenners and the Laura Petersons of this world. And Bradley kind of gets upset because she feels like Alex is poisoning her brain about Laura Peterson before she even meets the woman. Alex, though, goes on to tell her that she's had a lot of run-ins with Laura. She doesn't particularly trust her. She didn't think Laura likes her, so that's why she's kind of got her back up. One of the things she wanted to accomplish here today was getting their facts straight. Bradley is pretty surprised by this, thinking that Alex sounds crazy, but Alex asks her, what are we going to say about our last day? How I was trying to get you fired, and I found out that you interviewed Mitch behind my back and you interviewed Hannah the day she died? And do we really need people to know that I announced you as my co-anchor on a whim to get back at the network? Bradley gets Alex's point, so the two women start game planning on how to get their story straight. A couple of days later, Alex gets ready for her big interview with Laura. Alex is doing it at her apartment so she's more comfortable, and one of the many people that's going to be there is Chip. Although Chip is a little concerned because his deal isn't done yet. Chip is really there to kind of calm Alex down for moments like when Laura doesn't show up on time. And instead of Alex being the first one, her ego trip makes Laura wait when she finally does show up. Chip decides to leave Alex alone for a bit and walks out, and that's when he sees Mia and Corey and Stella. And Mia seems happy to see Chip. Corey, however, you never really can tell. He puts on the facade. But Stella does not hide her emotions. He then sees Laura walk in, so he goes to grab Alex, and while he's doing so, Corey goes and talks to Laura, asking her nicely to kind of prep Bradley a little bit when she's out in Iowa. Make her realize that reporting on things like sweatshops isn't really morning show material. She doesn't say yes, but she also doesn't say no. And then she gets ready to do the interview with Alex. Everybody who doesn't need to be there is told to get out. That actually includes Corey and Stella. So they head to the elevator. And Stella can't hold it in anymore. She tells Corey, I don't think it was a good idea to bring Chip back. And I wasn't going to say anything, but we need to talk to Alex. And Corey tells her, when we're not in a tailspin, you can do your loop-de-loops. But until then, you need Alex to land as much as I do. And Stella kind of takes offense to that and tells him, it's not like I don't want to approve stuff. It's because I actually care about this stuff. I want to build things, but it's tough to do when there's no foundation. And Corey says, I hear you. But in order to make those changes, you know what you need? You need success. So we need to keep Alex happy so she is successful. As they head home, Laura starts the interview. And it starts off with UBA's issues. But then Laura asks about Hannah. And that wasn't on the table. Alex actually says she was a pretty private person and I want to respect her privacy. And Laura doesn't press it, but she does go into Maggie Brenner's book. Maggie provided Laura with an excerpt from the book detailing the toxic environment that was at UBA. And Alex is getting visibly uncomfortable, but she handles it like a pro. She does, however, get pretty upset when Laura asks her, what was the nature of your relationship between you and Mitch Kessler, implying that the two had slept together. Alex kind of thinks about it, is a little taken aback, but says he was my best friend. But Mitch could be a lot of things to many people, and I cut off contact with him. When the interview wraps up and everybody leaves, Alex is pissed, and she starts taking it out on Chip. She was totally taken off guard by that question. She feels like it was more of an accusation, and she can't believe that somebody from the OWN network would actually ask it. And the reason she's taking it out on Chip is because he's the one who approved the questions, but he makes it clear. The question I approve was more of, how was your relationship with Mitch, not what was the nature of your relationship. Chip tries to calm her down by telling her that he doesn't think the network should have used it anyway, and he thinks she's slightly overreacting to this whole situation. But now that Laura Peterson's done with Alex, she moves on to Bradley in the Iowa caucus. And right before Bradley's going to get on the plane with Laura, she gets a phone call from Alex. And Alex goes on to tell Bradley about the question that she got regarding Mitch. But she's telling her this because she was taken off guard and she doesn't want Bradley to be taken off guard. Right before she hangs up the phone, though, she does make it clear to Bradley, by the way, I did not sleep with Mitch. And then Bradley gets on the plane and meets Laura Peterson for the first time. When they get to Iowa, Bradley and Laura do the interview, and Bradley shines. For Bradley, it kind of is a puff piece. But back in New York, Bradley's Iowa caucus stories are bumping Daniel and his update with the coronavirus. And after getting bumped yet again, Daniel ends up calling Mia because he's pissed. He says, you sent me across the world to the epicenter of an epidemic, and now I'm stuck in a hotel for 14 days quarantining, and now you're bumping me. Mia tries to explain, though, that they're in the middle of an impeachment, the Iowa caucus, and Kobe Bryant just died. So the stuff that he got bumped for is a pretty big deal. Daniel starts telling Mia on why an update on the coronavirus is important, and Mia starts telling him that she can hear TVs tuning out. Because at this point, and in the timeline, we're in early February, most Americans still aren't concerned with it. Now, while Mia is trying to calm down Daniel, Chip has made his return to UBA. And he finds that half the workers are thrilled and half the workers are not. And Renna tells him that there are just some people that need some time to get over what happened. He then goes to look at the footage from the Laura Peterson interview, and he lets the editor know that he didn't approve the question, so he wants to tighten it up a little bit because it does look pretty bad for Alex. Later that night, Bradley gives an update on the news about the Iowa caucus. They still don't have a winner. And as Alex is watching her report from home, she texts Bradley asking how it went with Laura. And Bradley doesn't get the text right away because she's just heading in her hotel room. As she's laughing with Laura about the fact that they don't have a result for the thing that they came out for, Laura lets her know that Corey wanted Laura to coach Bradley up. And the reason she's telling her this is because after seeing her in action, she doesn't feel like she needs to be coached up. And another reason she's telling her all this is because that she feels like Bradley is bigger than the morning show. She says to Bradley, the people that stay on the morning show can't really do anything else, but clearly Bradley can. Bradley is absolutely blushing. She's thrilled to get a compliment from such an accomplished woman. But Laura then asks about the relationship between her and Alex. And Bradley kind of laughs it off and doesn't answer the question. When she does end up getting back in her hotel room, she sees Alex's text message, and she responds with, it went great. Alex, though, doesn't see it until the next day, when Bradley and Laura have gotten back into New York and they're driving over to the studio. And Alex responds and asks, so she didn't ask anything invasive? And of course, she did. She kind of did with the last question. But Bradley sees it and puts it to the side. And maybe one of the reasons is she's sitting right next to Laura. And she turns to Laura and says, "Do you think you got everything you needed for the interview?" And Laura says, "Yeah. Honestly, I could have left yesterday, but I was having too much fun." She then gets a little bit closer to Bradley, though, and says, "Now that the cameras are off, now that I see how awesome you are, do you mind if I ask you a personal follow-up question just between us?" And Bradley says, "Yeah, of course." And Laura asks her, "Were you vetted for this job?" And Bradley doesn't say a thing, but she leans in and starts making out with Laura. Maybe it was a deflection. Maybe it's because she was actually attracted to her. Laura is, after all, a lesbian, but it definitely is a topic changer. A couple days later, Daniel is able to leave Beijing. Eric ends up leaving the morning show. They say goodbye to him. The Laura Peterson special airs, and because of Chip's editing ability, the question doesn't look that bad. And Corey ends up getting a call from Fred, but he ignores it. Because the next day, Alex Levy and Bradley Jackson are reuniting on the morning show. But the reason that Fred called is the same reason that he went all the way to Italy to visit Mitch. He finally gets Mitch to actually walk and talk with him. And the reason he showed up is because he wants to file a class action lawsuit against UBA. While Fred feels bad about what happened with Hannah, he takes no responsibility at all. Mitch, on the other hand, does feel guilty about what happened. He feels like Fred is being completely callous, and he wants nothing to do with a class action lawsuit. Fred keeps hammering home to Mitch that at the end of the day, they bear no legal responsibility, and they should not have to pay all of this money because, quote, some girl couldn't handle herself. But even with Fred's plea, Mitch has no interest in a class action. That night, he ends up meeting up with Paola. I think last episode I call her Isabella. It's hard to understand the Italian accent. IMDb did me dirty. But they start going through Paola's career. She's a documentarian. She's kind of looking for like a regular, steady job, and Mitch says, well, maybe I can pass off your stuff to somebody who can help. But Mitch's phone is blowing up. He doesn't want to get it, but Paola insists. And that's when, across the world, he ends up seeing the news that Alex Levy and Bradley Jackson are back together. And the reason his phone's blowing up is because people want him to comment on it. This upsets Mitch, so he says to Paola, I'm going to go, but Paola's curious as to why and grabs his phone, and that's when she sees the news, and she can't believe he's ready to just leave because of that. She tells him that that's your past. You have a chance to move on now. And Mitch says, I have moved on, but that is still a part of my life. And her advice to him is, you're never going to outrun the sadness, so grow some balls. The two start kind of arguing about Mitch's current situation a little bit, but Paola yells at him, you can still do good in the world, you can help people. Like, I want your help. I want you to do a documentary. There was an appeals court in Italy who overturned a rape conviction because the defendant said the victim was too ugly to rape. At this time, though, if Mitch is going to do a documentary, it's definitely not going to be about sexual abuse. So he stands up, thanks her, pays the bill, and then leaves. But a few days go by, he reconsiders, and he messages Paola, if the offer still stands, I'd like to help you with that documentary. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. But once again, thank you for checking out this recap.